What if the place we send our children to learn is actually designed to teach them never to think for themselves? Picture this. You walk into any American classroom, and what do you see? 30 desks arranged in perfect rows, all facing forward toward a single authority figure. A bell that controls when children move, when they eat, when they're allowed to speak. Students trained to raise their hands for permission to use the bathroom. A teacher positioned like a factory supervisor, monitoring compliance rather than nurturing curiosity. Now, walk into a 19th century factory floor or a modern prison. Notice anything familiar? Here's the uncomfortable truth hiding in plain sight. What we call education looks nothing like learning and everything like training. The institution we trust to develop young minds wasn't designed to create independent thinkers, innovative problem solvers, or free human beings. It was meticulously engineered to produce something else entirely. Obedient workers who follow schedules without question, citizens who mistake compliance for virtue, and minds that crave external validation more than internal truth. We call this preparing children for the real world. But what if the real world we're preparing them for is actually a cage? And what if they're learning to love their chains before they even know what freedom feels like? The blueprint for this psychological prison was drawn long ago, and the architect's name might shock you. One man saw this trap being built, a French philosopher who understood that the most effective prison is the one where inmates don't realize they're imprisoned and eventually learn to imprison themselves. Michel Foucault spent years studying how power operates in modern society. In his groundbreaking work, Discipline and Punish, he revealed that we'd built something unprecedented in human history. Institutions that control people not through violence, but through visibility. The key to understanding your child's classroom lies in an 18th century prison design that was never actually built. Jeremy Bentham's panopticon was supposed to be the perfect prison. Picture a circular building with cells around the perimeter and a central watchtower in the middle. Guards could observe every prisoner, but prisoners couldn't see the guards. Here's the psychological genius. Prisoners never knew when they were being watched, so they had to assume they were always being watched. Eventually, they would internalize the surveillance. They would watch themselves. Now think about your child's classroom. Desks arranged so the teacher can see every student at all times. Students unable to see who's being watched when. Constant evaluation, constant measurement, constant comparison with others. The teacher doesn't need to monitor every child every moment. The children learn to monitor themselves. Foucault understood that the panopticon wasn't just a prison design. It was the blueprint for modern society. The panopticon, he wrote, is a machine for dissociating the see-being-seen dyad. In the peripheric ring, one is totally seen without ever seeing. In the central tower, one sees everything without ever being seen. Your child sits in the peripheric ring, and they're learning to love it. But how exactly does this psychological architecture reshape young minds? The mechanisms are more insidious than you imagine. The system that shapes your child's mind operates through 5 mechanisms so subtle, so normalized, that we mistake them for natural features of learning. Understanding these is like discovering the hidden gears of a clock. Once you see them, you can never unsee them. Every school day begins with a sound that has nothing to do with learning and everything to do with training. The bell doesn't signal when knowledge is ready to be absorbed. It signals when bodies must move. Children learn that their internal rhythms, their natural curiosity, their biological needs are less important than external signals. Listen closely. Your child spends 13 years learning that the most important skill is responding immediately to arbitrary sounds. They are being trained like Pavlov's dogs, but instead of salivating for food, they're conditioning their minds to fragment attention into digestible chunks determined by someone else's schedule. Have you ever noticed how adults struggle to focus for more than 45 minutes on anything? That's not natural human attention span. That's learned helplessness installed in childhood. Walk into any traditional classroom and observe the seating arrangement. Why rows? Why all facing forward? The official explanation is to minimize distractions and maximize focus on the teacher. The psychological reality is more disturbing. Rows ensure that every child can be observed simultaneously by a single authority figure, while preventing children from easily collaborating or forming natural relationships. It's crowd control disguised as pedagogical necessity. Your child learns that being watched is normal, that surveillance equals safety, and that their value is determined by how well they perform under observation. Think about this. We're teaching children that authentic human connection is disruptive to learning. Perhaps no mechanism is more psychologically destructive than reducing complex human learning to letter grades. Children don't receive grades on their work. They receive grades on themselves. I'm a B student. She's failing. He's gifted. Grades create artificial scarcity of success. In a class of 30 children, only a few can be excellent, regardless of how much each child has actually learned or grown. This isn't measurement. It's manufactured competition designed to create hierarchies and ensure most children accept their designated place in the social order. The cruelest aspect? Children learn to judge their own worth by external metrics they can't control, setting them up for a lifetime of seeking validation rather than pursuing authentic growth. Every child in America learns the same things at the same time in the same way, regardless of their interests, abilities, or dreams. This isn't efficiency. It's the mass production of identical minds. When a child asks, "Why do I need to know this?" the honest answer is often, because the system requires it. Not because it serves their development, but because standardization demands uniformity over understanding. We're not educating children, we're processing them. The most insidious mechanism is what happens after children leave school. They've learned to watch themselves, grade themselves, and conform to invisible standards. They've internalized the panopticon. Even when no authority figure is present, they hear the bell, arrange themselves in rows, and wait for someone else to tell them what to think. This is why adults struggle with self-directed learning, why they panic without clear hierarchies, why they crave external validation more than internal satisfaction. The classroom didn't just teach them subjects, it taught them how to be subjects. But you might be thinking this is just how schools have always been. You'd be wrong. This system was deliberately designed by specific people for specific purposes, and the evidence will shock you. Sit down for this. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see every school building, every classroom, every report card your child brings home. This system didn't emerge by accident. What we call public education was deliberately engineered by people who understood exactly what they were building. And it wasn't designed to educate your children. In the early 1800s, Prussia faced a problem. How do you create citizens who will obediently serve the state, fight its wars, and work its factories without questioning authority? The Prussian solution was revolutionary. Compulsory schooling designed not to enlighten, but to condition. The Prussian system divided children by age rather than ability, used bells to control movement, emphasized memorization over thinking, and punished creativity while rewarding compliance. Students learned to follow orders, respect hierarchy, and accept their designated place in society. It was brilliant social engineering disguised as education. And it worked. Prussia's obedient population helped build one of Europe's most powerful military and industrial machines. Other nations took notice. Horace Mann, often called the father of American public education, visited Prussia in the 1840s and returned convinced he'd found the answer to America's needs. But Mann wasn't thinking about what was best for children. He was thinking about what was best for America's emerging industrial economy. The Industrial Revolution demanded workers who could tolerate repetitive tasks, follow schedules, accept supervision, and resist the urge to think independently about their conditions. Traditional apprenticeship systems that developed skilled, independent craftsmen were useless for factory work. America needed a new kind of human being. Mann's Massachusetts school system became the model. Age-based grades, standardized curriculum, trained teachers acting as supervisors, and the systematic suppression of individual differences in favor of mass production efficiency. By 1918, every American state had compulsory schooling laws based on the Prussian model. Your great-grandparents were the first generation processed through this machine. Here's where it gets truly sinister. The wealthiest Americans understood exactly what they were funding. John D. Rockefeller's General Education Board, established in 1903, stated its mission with chilling clarity. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. Read that again. Not education. Molding. The Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Corporation poured millions into shaping American education, but their goal wasn't to create independent thinkers. It was to create reliable workers and consumers. Andrew Carnegie was explicit. The problem of our age is the proper administration of wealth, so that the ties of brotherhood may bind together the rich and poor in harmonious relationship. Translation: keep the poor happy with their poverty by convincing them it's natural and necessary. Contemporary studies reveal the psychological toll of this system. Research by Peter Gray shows that rates of anxiety and depression among young people have skyrocketed in direct correlation with the intensification of schooling pressures. Studies on intrinsic motivation demonstrate that external rewards, grades, gold stars, test scores, systematically undermine children's natural love of learning. Neuroscience research reveals that the stress hormones produced by constant evaluation actually impair memory formation and creative thinking, the exact opposite of what education should accomplish. Yet we continue using a system designed for a world that no longer exists, producing graduates trained for jobs that have been automated away, while killing their capacity for the innovation and independent thinking our economy actually needs. Countries that have moved away from the Prussian model show dramatically different outcomes. Finland eliminated standardized testings, reduced homework, and gave teachers professional autonomy. Result? Finnish students consistently outperform American students while reporting much higher satisfaction and much lower stress. The evidence is overwhelming. Factory schooling was designed to produce compliant workers, not educated citizens. And it's working exactly as intended. But if you think this was just historical manipulation, wait until you see what they've done with modern technology. What Foucault observed in 18th century prisons and Maugham imported from 19th century Prussia has evolved into something far more sophisticated in 21st century America. Today's schools don't just train compliance, they've perfected it through digital surveillance that would make the panopticon's designers weep with envy. Modern classrooms are monitored by systems that track not just behavior, but thoughts. Learning management platforms record every click, every pause, every wrong answer. Eye-tracking software monitors where students look and for how long. AI algorithms analyze keystroke patterns to detect engagement levels and emotional states. Your child's school probably uses Google Classroom, which records every assignment, every comment, every moment of digital interaction. This data builds psychological profiles more detailed than anything Bentham could have imagined. The Watchtower doesn't just see all, it remembers all, analyzes all, and predicts all. Children now live under permanent surveillance disguised as personalized learning. The testing industry has turned education into a $1.7 billion assembly line, where children are products and test scores are quality control metrics. Students spend months preparing for tests that measure their ability to follow directions and select pre-approved answers, not their capacity to think, create, or solve real problems. Teachers are forced to teach to the test, eliminating any possibility of following children's natural curiosity or adapting to individual learning styles. Curriculum becomes scripted, creativity becomes dangerous, and children learn that there's always one right answer determined by someone else. The psychological message is devastating. Your thoughts, interests, and insights matter less than your ability to reproduce what authority figures want to hear. Educational technology companies have borrowed techniques from social media and gaming to make learning engaging. Points, badges, leaderboards, and reward systems train children to crave external validation for every small action. These systems don't enhance learning. They replace intrinsic motivation with addiction mechanics. Children learn to perform for likes, hearts, and points rather than for the joy of understanding. They're being trained to need constant digital feedback, preparing them perfectly for a lifetime of social media dependency. Modern homework isn't just academic practice, it's training in 24/7 compliance. Children learn that there's no escape from institutional control, no private time for unstructured thought, no boundary between school surveillance and family life. Digital homework platforms track exactly when assignments are completed, how long students spend on each problem, and which resources they access. Parents become unwitting guards in their own homes, enforcing compliance with systems they may not even understand. The family dinner table has become an extension of the classroom panopticon. Now comes the part you've been dreading. Time to examine how deeply this system has shaped your own mind. Are you ready to see yourself clearly? Question 1. When you hear a bell or alarm, what's your first instinct? Do you immediately think about what you're supposed to be doing rather than what you want to be doing? That's not natural human behavior. That's conditioned response from 13 years of bell training. Question 2. How do you react when someone asks you to think about a complex problem without giving you multiple choice options? Do you feel anxious not knowing the right answer? Do you look for authority figures to tell you what to think rather than trusting your own reasoning? Question 3. When you're in a group, do you automatically arrange yourselves in rows facing a designated leader? Do you wait for permission to speak? Do you feel uncomfortable when no one is clearly in charge? These are learned behaviors from classroom conditioning. Question 4. How do you measure your own worth? Is it through external validations, grades, promotions, likes, approval from others, or through internal satisfaction with your growth and contribution? If external validation feels more real than internal knowing, you're still living in the grade-based mindset. Here's what should terrify you. You probably just recognized yourself in several of these patterns. The system didn't just waste your time during childhood. It fundamentally altered how your mind works. You learned to think like a student rather than a human being. And now you're sending your children into the same machine, possibly with digital improvements that make the conditioning even more efficient. But before you despair completely, you need to know something. Not everyone has surrendered to this system. Before condemning the entire system, we must acknowledge something that gives hope. Not everyone has surrendered to the factory model. There are teachers who rebel, schools that innovate, and educational approaches that prove the panopticon's grip isn't absolute. These stories will restore your faith in what education could be. John Taylor Gatto won Teacher of the Year awards multiple times during his 30-year career in New York public schools, by systematically violating every rule of factory schooling. He eliminated homework, encouraged students to leave school for real-world apprenticeships, and taught children to question authority rather than obey it. His students didn't just learn subjects. They learned to think independently, start businesses, and solve problems the curriculum never anticipated. Gatto proved that even within the system, individual teachers can prioritize human development over institutional compliance. But here's what makes his story both inspiring and heartbreaking. He paid the price: constant conflict with administrators, threats to his job security, and eventual burnout from fighting the machine from within. Across the country, thousands of teachers make similar choices every day. They close their classroom doors and create islands of authentic learning within oceans of standardization. They're proof that the system's grip, while powerful, isn't total. Maria Montessori accidentally discovered what education looks like when you reverse every principle of factory schooling. In her first Casa dei Bambini in 1907, poverty forced her to let children move freely, choose their own activities, and learn at their own pace. The results shocked everyone, including Montessori herself. Children who had been labeled deficient began teaching themselves to read, demonstrating advanced mathematical concepts, and showing levels of concentration that adults found impossible to achieve. Montessori's approach eliminates almost everything the Prussian model considers essential: age-based grades, standardized curriculum, external rewards, teacher-controlled pacing, and competitive ranking. Instead, children develop intrinsic motivation, collaborative skills, and the ability to direct their own learning. Modern research validates Montessori's insights. Studies comparing Montessori students to traditional school students show higher creativity, better social skills, more academic engagement, and superior performance on standardized tests, despite never training for them. The Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts has operated since 1968 on a principle that would terrify factory school administrators. Children should be completely free to pursue their interests without adult interference. No curriculum, no grades, no age-based classes, no required subjects. Children from age 4 to 18 mix freely, learning through play, conversation, apprenticeship, and self-directed exploration. Adults serve as resources when requested, not authorities imposing predetermined learning objectives. The results challenge every assumption about how learning works. Sudbury graduates attend competitive colleges at higher rates than traditional school students, start successful businesses, pursue advanced degrees, and report higher life satisfaction throughout adulthood. Most importantly, they retain their natural curiosity, creativity, and love of learning, qualities that factory schooling systematically destroys. But let's be brutally honest about what traditional schools do accomplish. Even within their flawed structure, they provide literacy and numeracy to millions of children who might not otherwise access these foundational skills. They offer structure for families where parents work multiple jobs and can't provide educational support. They create social connections for children who might otherwise be isolated. Many children thrive within the factory model, especially those whose learning styles match its demands and whose family backgrounds prepare them for institutional success. The system isn't uniformly destructive. It's selectively destructive, working well for some while damaging others. Teachers within the system often provide emotional support, intellectual stimulation, and caring relationships that make profound differences in children's lives. School counselors, librarians, and administrators frequently advocate for individual students against systemic pressures. Even the structure and routine can benefit children from chaotic home environments, providing predictability and safety they can't find elsewhere. Here's where the story gets complicated, and you're not going to like this part. Most educational alternatives require significant privilege to access. Montessori schools often charge tuition. Sudbury schools exist primarily in affluent areas. Homeschooling requires a parent who can afford not to work full-time. The families most harmed by factory schooling, those in poverty with limited English, or facing systemic discrimination, often have the least access to alternatives. The system's defenders aren't necessarily wrong when they argue that public schools, however flawed, provide opportunities that wouldn't otherwise exist. But this reveals the trap's true sophistication. It makes itself indispensable by creating conditions where alternatives seem impossible, then points to its own necessity as justification for its existence. The question isn't whether schools serve some valuable functions. They do. The question is whether those functions require the psychological conditioning, surveillance architecture, and creativity suppression that define the current system. And the evidence from alternatives suggests they don't. So, what can you actually do? How do you reclaim your mind and protect your children's natural love of learning? The factory model trained you to wait for permission, seek external validation, and follow predetermined paths. But you can reclaim your capacity for independent thought if you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of deprogramming yourself. This isn't easy. You're fighting against 13 years of psychological conditioning, but it's possible, and it starts now. Remember what it felt like to wonder about something before school taught you that curiosity was disruptive? That spark still exists, buried under years of conditioning that told you to care more about grades than understanding. Start small. Identify one thing you're genuinely curious about that has nothing to do with career advancement or social status. Maybe it's how bread rises, why certain songs give you chills, or what happens in your garden when you're not watching. Follow that curiosity without any goal except satisfaction. This isn't about becoming smarter. It's about remembering what it feels like to learn because you want to know, not because someone else requires it. Set aside time each week for useless learning. Read poetry if you're an engineer. Study astronomy if you're an accountant. Let your mind wander into territories that serve no practical purpose. The goal is to rebuild your tolerance for uncertainty, your comfort with not knowing, and your ability to find joy in the process of discovery rather than just the outcome. This might be the hardest deprogramming of all. You've spent decades learning that your value depends on other people's approval, grades, promotions, likes, prestigious affiliations. But external validation is a drug that requires ever-increasing doses while never actually satisfying your deeper need for authentic self-respect. Start tracking moments when you think independently rather than looking for the right answer. When someone asks your opinion, notice if your first instinct is to figure out what they want to hear or to explore what you actually think. When you're in a group, observe whether you automatically defer to the highest status person or whether you contribute your genuine perspective. Practice saying, "I don't know," without shame. Practice changing your mind when presented with better evidence. Practice holding complex views that can't be reduced to simple positions. These are muscles that atrophy in factory schooling, but can be rebuilt with conscious effort. Most importantly, develop internal metrics for success that have nothing to do with external recognition. How often did you ask a question that revealed something new? How many times did you choose curiosity over certainty? Did you create something that didn't exist before? These are measures of human flourishing that no institution can quantify or control. Factory schooling taught you that questions are signs of ignorance and that smart people already know the answers. The truth is exactly the opposite. Intelligent people are characterized by the quality of their questions, not the certainty of their answers. Develop a personal practice of questioning assumptions, especially your own. When you find yourself feeling absolutely certain about something, that's precisely when to pause and ask, what would I have to believe for this to seem obviously true? What evidence would change my mind? Who benefits from me believing this? Question the sources of your beliefs. How many of your political opinions, lifestyle choices, and personal values can you trace to your own experience versus what you absorbed from school, media, or social pressure? This isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming conscious of how your mind has been shaped by forces outside your awareness. Practice intellectual humility by regularly seeking out perspectives that challenge your assumptions. If you're liberal, seriously engage with thoughtful conservative arguments. If you're religious, study secular philosophy. If you're skeptical, examine what you take on faith. The goal isn't to change your beliefs, but to hold them more consciously. Notice how often you automatically organize experience into institutional categories: grades, rankings, hierarchies, credentials. When you meet someone new, do you immediately want to know their job title, education level, or social status? That's institutional thinking, reducing complex humans to simple categories. Practice seeing people, ideas, and experiences outside these frameworks. Judge art by how it moves you, not by critics' reviews. Evaluate ideas by their usefulness, not by who said them. Measure experiences by their meaning to you, not by their Instagram worthiness. Most importantly, stop waiting for permission to think, create, or explore. You don't need credentials to have valid opinions. You don't need approval to pursue interests. You don't need a curriculum to guide your learning. If you have children, listen carefully. Your most important job isn't helping them succeed in school. It's protecting their natural love of learning from being destroyed by school. This requires delicate navigation, since they still need to function within the system. Answer their questions with more questions. Instead of, "That's right" or "That's wrong," ask, "What makes you think that?" Or, "How could we find out?" Model curiosity in your own life. Let them see you wondering about things, making mistakes, changing your mind. Most importantly, help them understand the difference between learning and schooling. School is a game with arbitrary rules that sometimes must be played. Learning is a lifelong adventure that belongs to them. Don't let the game kill the adventure. But individual resistance alone isn't enough. The factory model is too powerful, too systematic, too embedded in our economic and social structures. Real change requires something bigger. Individual resistance is vital, but it's not enough. The panopticon was built through systematic policy decisions, and dismantling it requires equally systematic structural changes. The question isn't whether these reforms are possible, it's whether we have the collective will to implement them. The testing industry has turned education into a $1.7 billion machine that measures compliance, not learning. Every hour spent preparing for standardized tests is an hour stolen from genuine education. Every dollar spent on test administration is a dollar that could fund libraries, art programs, or smaller class sizes. We need policies that phase out high-stakes testing and replace it with authentic assessment, portfolio-based evaluation, where students demonstrate learning through projects, presentations, and real-world applications. Community-based assessment, where local educators who know individual students make decisions about their progress. Several states have already begun this transition. New Hampshire has reduced standardized testing by 75% and replaced it with competency-based learning that allows students to advance based on mastery rather than seat time. Massachusetts is piloting performance assessments that measure critical thinking rather than test-taking skills. The resistance comes from companies that profit from testing anxiety and politicians who prefer simple metrics to complex reality. But parents are increasingly recognizing that test scores tell them nothing useful about their children's development while causing enormous psychological damage. The current curriculum was designed for an industrial economy that no longer exists. We're training children for jobs that have been automated away while ignoring the skills they actually need: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and adaptive problem solving. Finland provides the blueprint. They eliminated standardized subjects and replaced them with phenomenon-based learning, where students explore real-world problems that cross traditional academic boundaries. Climate change involves science, history, economics, and ethics. Urban planning requires mathematics, art, sociology, and engineering. This approach doesn't abandon academic rigor. It makes academics relevant by connecting them to genuine human challenges. Students learn mathematics because they need it to design sustainable cities, not because it will be on a test. Arts education must be restored as a core requirement, not an optional extra. Creativity isn't luxury. It's the foundation of innovation, emotional intelligence, and the kind of flexible thinking required in a rapidly changing world. Most importantly, curricula should be locally developed by communities that understand their children's needs, not imposed by distant bureaucrats or textbook companies seeking standardized markets. We need legislation that expands educational choices beyond the factory model, while ensuring those choices are accessible to all families, not just the privileged few. Educational savings accounts that allow families to direct their per-pupil funding toward alternatives. Montessori schools, democratic schools, homeschool cooperatives, or innovative programs that don't fit traditional categories. These exist in several states, but need expansion with robust oversight to prevent fraud while maintaining flexibility. Zoning laws should be reformed to allow micro-schools, small, mixed-age learning communities that can operate in residential areas. Occupational licensing requirements should be relaxed so that experts in various fields can teach without traditional education credentials. Most importantly, we need policies that support teacher autonomy rather than scripted compliance. Professional development focused on understanding child development, not implementing predetermined curriculum packages. Tenure protections for teachers who prioritize student growth over test scores. The deepest reform requires rethinking the basic assumptions of schooling itself. Age-based grades serve administrative convenience, not human development. Mixed-age learning environments better reflect how humans naturally learn and teach. The school day should be restructured around natural rhythms rather than industrial schedules. Later, start times for adolescents whose brains aren't fully awake at 7 a.m. Flexible scheduling that allows for deep focus rather than 45-minute fragments. Time in nature, which research shows is essential for healthy brain development. Physical environments must be redesigned to support learning rather than surveillance. Classroom walls that can be reconfigured, outdoor learning spaces, comfortable seating arrangements that encourage collaboration rather than rouse-facing authority. Most radically, we should question whether compulsory attendance laws serve children's interests or institutional convenience. Children learn best when they want to be there, and forced attendance often does more harm than good. The factory model persists partly because it's profitable for testing companies, textbook publishers, and educational technology corporations. We need economic policies that make human-centered education more profitable than compliance-based schooling. Tax incentives for companies that provide apprenticeships and mentorship programs for young people. Funding formulas that reward schools for student engagement and creativity rather than test scores. Support for teacher-owned schools that prioritize education over profit. These reforms face enormous resistance from entrenched interests, politicians who benefit from simple metrics, corporations that profit from standardized systems, administrators whose jobs depend on managing compliance rather than supporting learning. But change is already happening at the margins. Innovative schools are proving that alternatives work. Parent movements are demanding better options. Young teachers are rejecting factory model approaches despite pressure from above. The question is whether these changes can scale fast enough to save the children currently trapped in the system. But even with perfect structural reforms, we face a deeper challenge. How do we convince a population trained in factory schooling to want something different? How do we awaken people who've learned to love their chains? We stand at a crossroads that would have fascinated Foucault. He understood that the most powerful forms of control are the ones that feel like freedom, the ones that make subjects complicit in their own subjugation. What he couldn't have predicted is how perfectly we would apply his insights to our children. Every school day, millions of young humans enter institutions designed not to liberate their minds, but to colonize them. They learn to love their surveillance, crave their grades, and compete for the approval of systems that see them as products rather than people. They graduate trained to follow schedules they didn't choose, pursue goals they didn't set, and measure their worth by metrics they didn't create. We call this education. But what we've actually built is the most sophisticated compliance training program in human history. Here's what should keep you awake tonight. What kind of minds are we mass producing? Look around at the adults in your life. How many of them think independently? How many pursue learning for its own sake? How many question authority rather than seeking its approval? How many create rather than consume? How many find meaning in their work rather than just earning paychecks? The factory model has succeeded beyond its architects' wildest dreams. We've created generations of humans who wait for permission to think, who need external validation to feel worthy, who prefer the comfort of being told what to do over the responsibility of choosing for themselves. And now, right now, as you watch this, we're feeding our children into the same machine, possibly convinced that slight improvements will somehow transform a system designed for compliance into one that fosters freedom. But the tragedy isn't just what we're doing to children, it's what we've done to ourselves. Most adults have so thoroughly internalized the panopticon that they can't imagine alternatives. They defend the system that damaged them, because recognizing the damage would be too painful. When parents say, "School was hard for me too, but I turned out fine," they're revealing how completely they've accepted their own domestication. When teachers say, "I have to prepare them for the real world," they're acknowledging that the real world is a cage and their job is to make children comfortable in captivity. When policymakers debate testing methods rather than questioning why we test at all, they're trapped inside assumptions so deep they can't see them. The system doesn't just create compliant students, it creates compliant adults who will perpetuate the system without question. You have a choice no previous generation possessed. You can see the machinery of mental conditioning in real time. You understand the psychological mechanisms being used against children. You have access to research proving that alternatives work better. This knowledge creates a moral responsibility that's almost unbearable. Every time you send your child to a factory school, you're participating in their psychological conditioning. Every time you focus on grades rather than growth, you're reinforcing the surveillance mindset. Every time you accept standardized metrics as measures of human worth, you're validating the system that reduces children to data points. But you also have unprecedented power to resist. You can model curiosity in your own life. You can ask better questions than the ones school taught you to ask. You can measure success by internal satisfaction rather than external validation. You can teach children to think critically about the very system they're navigating. Think about the children growing up right now, native to digital surveillance, trained from birth to crave algorithmic approval. They're learning that emotions can be regulated through consumption. That identity comes from brand affiliation, that surveillance equals safety. By the time they're adults, the patterns we've explored will feel as natural as breathing. They won't remember a time when learning felt like play, when questions mattered more than answers, when their worth wasn't determined by external metrics. You might be their last hope of remembering what authentic human development looks like. The factory model promises that if children just comply long enough, work hard enough, score high enough, they'll eventually be free to pursue their dreams. It's a lie that every generation has believed, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The truth is simpler and more challenging. Freedom isn't earned through compliance. It's practiced through resistance. Critical thinking isn't taught through standardized curriculum. It's modeled through authentic questioning. Human dignity isn't granted by institutions. It's claimed through conscious choice. Every day you have dozens of opportunities to choose consciousness over compliance, curiosity over certainty, authentic growth over artificial metrics. Every interaction with a child is a chance to demonstrate that their questions matter more than predetermined answers, that their individual development trumps institutional convenience. The panopticon was designed to make you forget you have these choices, to make surveillance feel like safety, compliance feel like virtue, and conditioning feel like education. But now you know better. So here's the question that will determine whether the next generation grows up free or continues the cycle of educated servitude. What are you going to do with this knowledge?